The Shophetim Series. Black Gold. The Shophetim Series. Dark Waters. Intro. Shophetim Series. This series will be based on the various judges, or Shophetim, and their missions. Each book features one or more of the various modern-day judges. In ancient times, God raised up judges to deal with his people. To not only to judge and enforce the laws, but to help defend and destroy the enemy. Now, the time has come for the judges to return. The supernatural have always walked beside the natural human world, but due to the incline of darkness rising, it was time for the judges to make a return to defend the innocent and dish out justice. Modern-day judges still do much as the old ways. All trace their lineage back to the 12 tribes of Israel. They serve as leaders and execute the laws in the land they govern. Not man's laws, but God's. Most major cities have one judge, and that judge is replaced by the oldest sibling. If there is more than one sibling, they have the option of becoming a wandering judge. The wandering judges wander about the world to help other judges, towns, agencies, and individuals with dishing out law and order, as well as the Lord's vengeance and justice. Most judges have their unique abilities, granted unto them individually by God based on their talents, but all can see into the spirit realm. The judges have power to decide justice and punishment right then and there on the spot, while agents must bring the creature in, unless it is a life or death situation. Basically, agents are the police and judges are the judges. Like the judicial system, their word is the last. They are often aided by angels in taking down the strongholds and powers of darkness. Two kingdoms are at war, the light and the dark, each having rank and armies. The judges are the generals. It is black and white, there is no gray area. I wanted to make it clear that the agents of the darkness are not cool, hip or awesome. Evil is evil, but in these times, evil is called good and good evil. Jesus said that would happen, but in this series, I call it how it is. All evil and powers given by Satan are darkness. All witchcraft, speaking with the dead, divination, horoscopes, etc. It is not of God. Most do not understand or want to believe. The dead are dead. These so-say ghosts are just crafty demons. People have a chance to repent, turn from their ways, and strive to live for God. They are given this chance, but if they deny it, the sentence is given by the judge. Judges 2:11-23 am. Judges of the past. Most Shophetim judges acted primarily as military leaders in times of war. The leaders were thought of as being sent by God to deliver the people from a threat. After the threat had passed, Shophetim were generally expected to give up their position as military leaders. They were most likely tribal or local leaders, contrary to the Deuteronomistic historians' portrayal of them as leaders of all of Israel. But their authority was recognized by local groups or tribes beyond their own. Be followed when a person is killed by an unknown murderer, and his body is found in a field, which underscores the responsibility of the community and its leaders, not only for what they do, but also for what they might have prevented from being done. Judges of today. The story of the judges seems to describe successive individuals, each from a different tribe of Israel, described as chosen by God to rescue the people from their enemies and establish justice. The book of Judges mentions 12 leaders who judged Israel: Othniel, Ehud, Shamgar, Deborah, Gideon, Tola, Jair, Jephthah, Ibzan, Elon, Abdon, and Samson. The judges today can each trace their lineage back to the original judges of ancient times. The first of the modern judges began in the 1800s. Only a few humans were given the power of the judges. Among them were Catherine the Great, Daniel Boone, Wyatt Earp, and many more across the globe. During the 1900s, the judges gathered together in Jerusalem and created an elder group of judges that would govern the others and pass laws as well as judgment. This was known as the Coud, or Council. Chapter 1. When you pass through the waters, I will be with you, And when you pass through the rivers, they will not sweep over you. When you walk through the fire, you will not be burned, the flames will not set you ablaze. Isaiah 43:2. 1920s New Orleans, Louisiana. The Roaring Twenties in New Orleans was like no other in a big city during that time. The main streets and French Quarter bustled with people during the day but were more active at night. The Big Easy was an extremely popular party destination for most, but those who lived there were poor and just tried to make a living. The neon lights, food, and music had a way of covering up the hardships. Jazz musicians practiced on the street corner for coins during the day, and at night in the clubs for money. Others sold goods along the many streets, while some traded magic and voodoo for money. Silly outsiders fell prey to them, not knowing the real danger in messing with such darkness. New Orleans was a non-stop city, especially during the nightlife. The natives, along with many visitors, danced, drank, and spent their time in the old city. The feeling of dark wonder and fantasy flooded the alleys at night. As the city boomed with life, the humans walked amongst the supernatural. The city was so diverse that the supernatural were accepted in a way. Supernaturals were like an open secret, like the neighbor having an affair and everyone knowing, but not wanting to talk about it. Vampires, werewolves, and other beings knew this and walked among the humans, keeping an almost unknown treaty. Don't mess with us, and we won't mess with you type attitude. They even set up their own way of life, including laws, territories, etc. They did their best to stay out of the limelight of the humans, and tried to stay a myth or legend to most. However, some creatures did set up a sort of treaty with human governments, back when the immigrants from the old world ventured to the Americas. They also knew if they stepped out of line, the judges would come for them. Some creatures already had been living here among the Native Americans and old tribes, but many were from across the world seeking a sort of change of scenery. Both sides do their best to stay out of each other's affairs. The supernatural having their own law and government as well as the humans with theirs. Each having their own side, and none were really allowed to cross it. The crowd had just started to branch out around the world, so their laws and procedure were new. Most supernaturals went unnoticed, and the judges only dealt with the aggressive ones. The surrounding swamps and bays also beamed with life much like the city, both natural and supernatural. The dark murky waters held wonders, and that wonder was a rare creature indeed. A ripple from underneath its surface parted as a young female broke free from the water. The woman swam slowly to the muddy bank of the swamp and rested her arms on it. Evangeline lay half emerged into the brown swamp water of the Louisiana bayou. It was a warm humid summer night, and the only light that shone for miles was the full moon overhead and the occasional lightning bug. She dipped her gray tail in and out of the water as she looked up at the stars. It was once a light gray, almost white tail, but since the mermaid spent most of her time in the murky, dirty water, it had a tint of green slime. The mermaid gathered her long wavy chocolate-colored hair out of the water and laid it across her ivory-skinned shoulder. Eva may have looked to be in her late 20s, but in fact she had just turned 108. The reason for her swim was that Eva had been in a scuffle with her father early that day, and decided it was time for her to break away and be on her own to cool off. The Cajun mermaid had an old shack out in the swamp where she would move her stuff. Henry Legnon, her father, wasn't the greatest of fathers. He was the son of a true-blood mermaid and pirate, so all his life he was a thief and a con man. Evangeline did not approve of this lifestyle, and the two often argued. The mermaid was soft-hearted, and did not like the ways of the criminal and his enterprise. Henry loved Eva, but oftentimes his career got in the way of him being a decent father. From the 1700s till around the 1800s, Henry and Eva's half-brother Henry Jr. had run ships with Jean Lafitte. Jean Lafitte was a French pirate and privateer in the Gulf of Mexico in the early 19th century. He and his elder brother, Pierre, spelled their last name Lafitte, but English-language documents of the time used Lafitte. The latter has become the common spelling in the United States, including for places named after him. Lafitte was believed to have been born either in Basque France or the French colony of Saint-Domingue. By 1805, he operated a warehouse in New Orleans to help disperse the goods smuggled by his brother Pierre Lafitte. This is where he met Henry, and the two became the best of friends. Henry Jr. was a chip off the old block. He ran with his father and ran other businesses with him. After the United States government passed the Embargo Act of 1807, the Lafittes and Legnons moved their operations to an island in Barataria Bay, Louisiana. By 1810, their new port was very successful. The Lafittes and Legnons had a profitable smuggling operation, and also started to engage in piracy. Around this time is when Henry met Evangeline's mother Claire. Although Claire knew Henry's secret, the fact he was a merman, Henry did not wish to share that with others. He only told Claire out of convenience, and to gain trust from the fellow pirate. Henry Sr. never told anyone else out of fear for them taking advantage of his and his son's powers. He knew being such a creature the humans would no doubt kill him and his son. This was a fear he passed to his children Henry Jr. and Eva. He also passed his powers of slow aging, almost immortality, shifting between legs and a tail, underwater breathing, and the small ability of controlling water, to either damage or heal. Henry Jr. did not really care that his father moved on from the death of his mother. He was just surprised his father chose a half-human to settle with. The son shared the same distance for humans due to the fact it was their fault his mother perished. Henry and Claire, a witch and half-human, were married not even a year after they met. Claire knew Henry was a pirate, and she herself was an owner of a tavern and brothel on the seaside. Both criminals and their operations gave them much wealth in southern Louisiana. Though Lafitte and Legnon warned the other Baratarians, people who lived at Barataria Bay, of possible military attack on their base of operations, a United States naval force successfully invaded in September 1814 and captured most of Lafitte's fleet. Later, in return for a legal pardon for the smugglers, Lafitte and his comrades helped General Andrew Jackson defend New Orleans against the British in the final battle of the War of 1812. During this time, Eva was born. Claire thought it best he took the child and lay low for a while. Meanwhile, Henry Jr. and his small crew fled to the Caribbean. The Lafittes and Legnon became spies for the Spanish during the Mexican War of Independence, and moved to Galveston Island, Texas, where they developed a pirate colony they called Campage. Here Eva grew up. Lafitte continued attacking merchant ships as a pirate around Central American ports, until he died circa 1823, trying to capture Spanish vessels. Speculation about his life and death continues among historians, since Henry took up over his operations, and to this day runs them. Henry moved the crew and his daughter Eva back to New Orleans. He then set up the same operation of smuggling and running the docks of New Orleans. Eva and her father's relationship drifted farther apart. Henry kept many secrets from his daughter. He never told her the truth of her mother or the fact she had a half-brother. All her life her father had warned Eva of the evil of humans, and to fear the judges. The judges were the equivalent of the boogeyman to her. Henry soon hired James for his second-in-command, and to also keep an eye on his daughter. James Callum was a tough British werebear, or a man who could shift into a bear. James was in his early 40s, but had a lifetime of crime that could be seen hardened in his face. He was a handsome brute behind those scars, but his demure and stature scared most. James was always kind to Eva, mostly because he fancied her. Eva did not much like him because of how much of a brute he was. James was a huge man, about 6'4" and built like a boxer. James ran Henry's recent bootleg business. Being in the time of Prohibition, Henry saw an opportunity to make big bucks. She did not much like how James would stare at you like he was sizing you up to win a fight. Every now and then James would ease up and smile, but the males still frightened her. He once beat a man to death with his bare hands, for what reason Eva could not recall. Now Henry was a businessman first and foremost. He did love his daughter, but he never spoiled her. He taught her to work for what she wanted and sometimes taught her about his business. It was mostly trade and shipping. Moving things here to there, and oftentimes they were either illegal or for the supernatural. Ever since the separation from Claire, Eva's mother, he was never the same. Henry tried his best to keep his distance from the House of the Rising Sun, the brothel and tavern Claire had run, so he could run the port of New Orleans. Owning it gave Henry a major pull on the city. Henry controlled the waters, physically and metaphorically, and what came and went into the city. This, however, came with a price. He had to serve Neff, the devil of New Orleans. Eva enjoyed many simple things such as music and art, so New Orleans was the perfect place to live. It was the only reason she never really left. She loved to sketch, paint, and sculpt, and often did its French Quarter. She also loved the beauty in nature, and would often escape to hide away and paint. She did, however, grew accustomed to her father's ways and only partook in them to learn, as well as flatter her father. Eva may have been 100, but to Henry she was just a teenager going through a phase. He let her run to her swamp hideaway unfollowed. The only place Eva knew at the time was the swamps and bayous. It was safer than the city, and she enjoyed the freedom and solitude. No pirates or criminals out here. The raccoon scurried by breaking her days at the stars, but Eva did not mind. She loved the wildlife. They were much better company than humans or other supernatural her father dealt with. The raccoon made his way towards Eva's hand, but before she could pet him, his ears perked up. Voices could be heard of men in the distance, and the raccoon ran off up a tree. Eva also looked around a bit before diving into the murky water. She was going to swim off and up the bayou to head deeper in the marsh, but something tugged at her mind. Her curiosity. Who in their right mind would be out here in the dark of night? Most humans or supernatural never ventured this far out into the swamp and marsh. The mermaid swam over to a cypress tree that jutted out the water and peeked her green eyes around the wood. She watched as two men carrying lanterns pushed a third man to his knees in front of the bank of the swamp. It was so dark, but mermaids had excellent vision and even better night vision. It helped them in murkier deep water. All the frogs and crickets stopped their chattering, and Eva listened as she clung to the bark of the tree. "Thought you were the best man for the job, huh, Donald?" One man snickered as the other began to tie up with ropes the man they called Donald. He was gagged so he could not answer the men back. All he could do was look up in a hopeless stare. Now that Donald was bound, he couldn't move or even attempt to flee for his life. The other man laughed as he finished the knot. "Have a nice swim, you will make excellent gator feed," the other man said as the two picked Donald up and chunked him into the water. They watched him struggle and sink before walking away laughing. Eva turned and pressed her back flat on the tree. She slowly sank back down into the dark water with a simple flick of her tail. For once she was at a standstill. Should she just swim off and let the man drown and become food for the animals, or should she save him? He was obviously not the best outstanding citizen being tossed into the swamp like that. It meant he was into some trouble, and human trouble wasn't worth the hassle, but who was she to judge? In fact, she was sure her father had done this to many humans who crossed him. That thought made her decision for her. If it was something to get back at her father, by saving this human, then she would do it. She would save him out of spite. Without a second thought, Evangeline dove down and made her way through the murky water. Finally, after pushing past a large cypress knee, the mermaid reached the slumped human, praying she wasn't too late. She reached out and tugged on the rope, but it was too tight. He began to squirm and fight, not knowing what was grabbing at him. She swam in front of him and removed his gag. She knew if she didn't do something soon, he would die. Without hesitation, she pressed her lips against his. Opening his mouth, she breathed into his. Donald figured she was trying to help, so he stopped fighting and sucked in the air thankfully. Eva floated in front of him, both of their bodies motionless as she sucked in water through her gills and breathed oxygen into his mouth. The only thing that moved was the flicker of her tail, keeping them upright. Eva was grateful that Donald kept himself clean and smoke-free. Most humans didn't care about any kind of hygiene, but Donald's lips and breath weren't bad. After a couple more puffs, she broke away from his lips. The mermaid then pointed upwards and grabbed a hold of his ropes. The male was a bit bulkier than her small frame, but with her supernatural strength, mostly from her tail, Eva began to pull and swim. They finally broke the surface of the water, and Donald let out a huge gasp followed by coughing. Eva was adapted to breath water and air, so none of this affected her. The other men must have had weights added to the rope due to her having to drag him with all her might. Now Eva was an expert swimmer. Her tail was all muscles, so for her to have difficulty, then it would have been impossible for a human to accomplish this feat. Her tail thrashed and propelled the two slowly towards the shallow bank of the marsh. She quickly put her hand over his mouth to quiet him. "Hush, human, I don't want your friends to hear and come back." She whispered the command in his ear. Donald nodded from under her hand and took deep, quiet breaths. Her skin smelled like magnolia under the swamp water musk. She removed her hand slowly and grunted as she began to pull him up the bank. She got him halfway out the water and laid him on his back. Eva then collapsed exhausted beside him. Both breathed hard, trying to catch their breath. "Thank you, ma'am." Donald spoke in a low tone, and he turned his head to look at her. Eva was laying on her belly flat out against the cool mud. She moved her wet curly brown locks from her face, so she could see him better. The moon peeked from behind the clouds, and the light danced across his face. He was beautiful, Evangeline thought to herself. Short dark blonde hair that was shaved along the side and the rest slicked back on his head. Most likely due to the water, or it was intentionally cut that way. He was clean-shaven and had a hard look on his face, kinda like her father's bodyguard, but his blue eyes told a different story. They were full of pain and compassion. Like he only did things to survive and felt guilty for them. He had a scar that ran across his right cheek. It trailed from his nose towards his ear. Her long gray tail twitched a bit from the recent strain, and Donald looked down at the water. His eyes grew big and then looked over at her. He was speechless, but she could understand what his eyes were asking. "Yes, I'm a mermaid. No, you are not dead." She sat up and scooted over to his bonds and tried to untie them. But was all he could say. Donald just accepted it. It was not the most important thing now. What was getting out of these ropes. A rustling in the bushes made her head shoot up. She looked around like a deer would, scanning the horizon. Suddenly, the raccoon came waddling out holding on to a pocket knife. Eva's face turned into a smile. "Did you steal this?" she asked playfully. She took the knife from the raccoon and began to cut the rope. Donald's eyebrow lifted as he watched the whole scene. "There, one down." She huffed as she sawed through the thick yellow weighted rope. "So, what did you do to deserve this?" she asked as she worked on the bonds. I failed to carry out my job." He almost forced it out. "I promise to tell you everything and to serve you, ma'am, if you get me out of here. You saved my life and in return I give it to you. A life debt." He spoke in such a gentlemanly southern way. It wasn't too deep a Cajun accent, more like a northern Louisiana one. Cajuns had a thicker, more French type, and at times it was hard to understand for some people, but being Eva was a native, she could. She also knew French, Cajun French, Haitian and other various languages from the pirate colony. Eva glanced up from what she was doing. She never would have thought a human would say such things to her. It was even a greater shock that she was leaning towards believing him. "You're right," she shook her head as she looked down and continued to saw away at the ropes. "I swear if I let you loose and you try anything, I will finish what they started." She pointed the knife at him for a moment. "No ma'am, I mean it. I have made some messed up choices in my life, but I promise. As God is my witness, I promise to serve you no matter what." She paused and sighed. He sounded so sensitive, but Eva had trust issues thanks to her father and the company of criminals he kept. "We will see." She made no promises as she cut through another bond. Evangeline cut through the rest of the rope in silence, and when Donald was free, the mermaid jumped back into the water, holding the knife up in case he would attack. Donald removed the rest of the rope and tossed it to the side. He then sat Indian style and rubbed his wrists. Why wasn't he running? She asked herself. The raccoon that had given the knife then took the rope and ran off. Donald smiled and shook his head before looking back down in the water at Eva. The mermaid saw her chance and swam away. His face dropped in disappointment. "Hey," he called out and hopped to his feet. "Miss," he called out. She could hear his calls from underneath the water. "Miss, please." He ran down the bank looking for her. Her head peeked up as her eyes glowed with the gators and watched him. "Please come back." She had enough of his screaming and surfaced fully. "Are you stupid? Are all humans this dumb? I saved you and yet you yell and draw attention instead of running." She gnashed her teeth. Donald stopped and looked down at her. He stepped over a cypress stump as he came closer to the water. He glanced down and stepped on a limb that outstretched over the water. "I told you, I am your servant now." She waved it off and rolled her eyes. "I don't want a servant, now begged inhuman, before the gators make a meal of you." Eva turned to dive again, but he called out again. "No, I will not. I swore an oath and I do not tend to break it. A life for a life." She growled a bit. "Are all humans this difficult?" Donald smirked a bit. "Most are." He shrugged as he held onto the tree. Eva rolled her eyes as she began to swim. Lightly propelling her tail through the water, her head bobbed up and down as she made her way down the swamp. As her head just bobbed above the water, out the corner of her eyes, she could see him following like a lost puppy. She could have just dived down and lost him. Why was she even worried if he was following? She stopped and treaded water for a moment, and so did he. I swear the coon was less creepy. She turned and glared. He just stood there and blinked at her, not saying a word. "Ooh, fine. One night and then you go back to where you came from." She huffed and swam towards her hideout. Donald almost lost her a couple times as he tracked through the muddy, nasty swamp. His once white shirt was now brown and black from the forest, and one of his suspenders hung off his pants broken. She knew he must have been a worker, being in this time most workers in the 20s wore this type of getup. Eva had been around since the 1800s, and watched how the human world had changed so much. Her father believed in hiding in plain sight. It wasn't that hard, but she was sort of glad she was able to learn a little about the world. Eva swam up to a small dock and hopped up onto the wooden planks. She grabbed a rope that was slung over one of the poles and wrapped it around her. Her tail then turned to legs as she stood up slowly and began to wring her long wet hair out. Donald stumbled out of the bush with wide eyes in amazement. "How did you?" She looked over at him and then turned without a word to walk the small path towards a small home. He waited a moment before following her. This was all new to him, and the male tried to comprehend it all. The inside looked way better than the out. It was decorated with a bunch of natural things such as oyster shells and other shiny things she had collected. She had a way to turn certain trash into a treasure. Paintings hung on the wall, and in one corner sat an easel with a blank canvas. Donald walked through the shell curtain that separated the kitchen living room and into her bedroom, where she dug for clean clothes. She tossed him a shirt and a pair of old pants. "Here, get cleaned up and then you may ask me what you wish." He nodded and took the clothes gratuitously. They were better than his old worn clothes. These seemed to be fully intact and clean. He followed Eva out of her room and into the kitchen area. It was such a small shack, but it was homey. He figured the bathroom was outside like an outhouse, but it looked as if she had a tub off in the corner. She had to have come from money, or stole this, because he had never seen such a nice tub before. He studied it as he stripped from his clothes and began to put the new ones on. He was about one leg in when she came out. "No, no, no, clean up, go on. In the tub you go." He went to cover himself, but it seemed like she didn't really care about nudity. Her face was young and beautiful, but the way she held herself and her green eyes told him she was quite old. He watched her bend over the tub and turn the water on. "Well, go on," she motions him to get in the tub. Donald did as she motioned. He took the pants off and stepped into the tub and sat. She studied his muscles and then shook off her staring. It had been a while since she was in the company of a man like this. She then left to grab a chair and sat beside him. "Now, I guess this would be the best time to tell my story, and you may share yours if you like. I don't often speak of my past, nor speak to humans." She looked down at the floor. Donald went to say something, but decided to remain silent as the water slowly filled up around him. She reached behind her and grabbed the old-looking perfume and soap bottles. She poured a little into the water and then handed him a rag. He took it slowly. "My name is Evangeline Legnon. My father, Henry Legnon, fell in love with a human and left the sea and his pirate ship to be with her. You see, my father and I are not full-blooded merfolk. That is why we are able to switch between our tails and legs. My father never told my mother what he truly was, so when I was born, he made sure to find the right magical creature to take care of me, so my mother wouldn't find out." This was a story Henry told Eva. Claire knew full well what Eva and he were, but to protect her from searching for her mother, he lied about Claire to Eva. The merman hid many secrets from his daughter. The creature was a Creole fairy folk who once was a slave not only to humans, but to an evil voodoo queen. My father saved her and gave her a job to watch over me. Mimi is what I called her, and she was a very loving nanny to me. Her fey magic kept me safe from not only evil creatures and other humans, but it also shielded my tail from my mother Claire. This worked out for a couple years. I was around 5 or so when my mother found out. Fee ran my water and left for a moment to get a towel when my mom walked in. She saw my tail splashing wildly and ran out screaming. Being half mermaid, half human, I have control of my tail, but at that time I had no control, so anytime I would get wet my legs would turn. It wasn't until I turned 21 did I mastered. She paused to relive the moments as she told this stranger her life. She reached over and turned the water off and glanced over at him. He slouched in the tub watching her intently and patiently wanting to know more. She was curious about him, but promised to tell the basics of her story. She couldn't tell every detail being she was roughly around 100 years old. That was 2 or 3 lifetimes for a human, but to merfolk she was still a child. When my mother found out the secret, she was going to leave us and turn us in. My dad could have been cruel like most human men and killed her, but he had her placed in a mental hospital. After, he just packed everything up and we moved to Texas for a while. Henry and Jean Lafitte ran a crew together, but once the pirate passed away, My father moved us back out here with his crew. He now runs the docks. She wrapped her long hair into a bun and noticed the bruises and cuts on his face and body. She knelt beside the tub and reached out to touch his cuts. The water trailed up his body slowly and surrounded his injuries in a swirling motion. The water then began to heal him. "What about you?" she asked, watching the bewildered expression on his face. "Well, not much," he shrugged. "My name is Donald Donnybrough. I was born in 1889 and lived in New Orleans my whole life. I wanted to join the army during the Great War and even managed to sneak in, but was eventually sent home being too young. We were a poor family, so I have been working since I was 9 in factories and such. That wasn't cutting it, so then my life sort of turned to the criminal. My mom became ill and my father left us, leaving me to be the breadwinner for me and my 2 siblings. I stole and pickpocketed until one day I picked the wrong pocket. He was a leader of the majority crime in Louisiana and lived down in the French Quarter. A sort of Cajun mafia. He admired my skill and bravery, so he gave me a job. He paid for my mom to get better, so I was pretty much in debt with him. For 10 years I stole, harassed, and even killed for that man until recently, on a booze run, our shipment came up short. It was because of a kid trying to do what I used to do. The boss wanted me to kill him, but I couldn't because I guess I saw myself in the boy. So, he killed the kid in front of me, and had his men throw me into the bayou. I thought I was dead until he looked up and into her green eyes. My life of crime and all the horrible things I have done, I deserve to die, but God sent you to save me." He smiled a bit. His face warmed up and Eva removed her hand from his chest. All his cuts were now healed. "Finish cleaning up, I will make you something to eat," Eva said, standing as she turned into the kitchen. It wasn't her place to judge, her father was just like his boss. A criminal. Henry wasn't always so cruel. He turned when his wife, her mother, was going to betray them. Or that was what Eva was told. Eva fixed on a quick meal and sat it on this small table that was attached to the wall. He walked in the kitchen, now clean, and sat at the small table. "Thank you," he said as he began to eat. Eva wasn't hungry due to all the evening's excitement. She was nervous and feared her father would find her, and worse, find Donnie. "We can't stay here." Evangeline spoke softly, breaking the silence. "If my father found me, then found you, he would." She trailed off at the thought. "Where do you want to go?" he asked, but she had not the slightest idea. "I have no clue." She frowned a bit as she stood in front of him, still in her robe. "Maybe just catch a boat out of the city?" he asked. "Perhaps. I will sleep on it. I suggest you get some sleep as well." She pointed to the small couch in the corner of the living space before she walked to her room. Chapter 2. The next day Eva awoke to the morning sun peeking through her curtains. She thought for sure in the middle of the night the man would come to his senses and run away, far away from all this nonsense, but instead she found him fast asleep on the couch. He was too tall for it, and his feet and half his legs hung over it. She smiled a bit at the sight before tiptoeing into the kitchen, trying not to wake him. Eva began to cook breakfast, and the smell eventually woke Donald. He sat up and cracked his back before walking into the kitchen. "Morning." His voice was dry and cracked. She turned and smiled. "I thought you would have sneaked out last night," she confessed. One thing about Eva, she may be shy at first, but that did not stop her from saying what she needed to say. She was old enough that her word was going to be said no matter what society thought. She was raised in equality. The merfolk and supernatural culture, everyone was the same. "No, ma'am. I told you my bond is my word." He stood there and watched her. Such a kind criminal. She regretted saying it, sort of slipped out. "Well, I'm no longer what I used to be. I am whatever you need me to be." Still Eva was not buying this. She turned and faced him. Is this an act to get with me or because of my supernatural looks or being? She asked. Donald was a bit struck at the question. Donald shook his head no. You saved my life, it technically belongs to you now. He spoke with a straight face. Well, I release you, I won't have any slaves. I hate that. She waved her hand and looked at the floor. Her memories brought back on the stories her nanny Fee told her. No ma'am, I'm not a slave, I'm choosing this, to help you or aid you in any way. Consider it a work contract then. He tried to explain. I have no riches to pay you and stop calling me ma'am. She frowned a bit. I don't want riches or any of that. He huffed. Companion then, friendship. You can't tell me you aren't lonely up here all by your lonesome? He asked. She did not say a word. The mermaid turned around to flip the eggs. I am quite content with where I live and whose company I keep, which is my own. She furiously scraped at the pan. Eva did not even notice Donald come up behind her and touch her hand. Ma'am, you can't tell me you enjoy the company of thieves. He pointed to the raccoon in the tree right outside her house. He was wrapped up in one of her sheets and fast asleep. It was probably the same raccoon from that night before who aided her. She couldn't help but let out a laugh as she turned and looked up at him. He was inches away from her, looking down into her green eyes with his crystal blues. They were as blue as the wide open ocean, a place she rarely ever got to swim. She quickly looked away and cleared her throat. He let her hand go and she turned the fire off. I grew up in the company of thieves, Mr. Bro. Eva wasn't lying. Her father and his lifestyle and crew were all con men and pirates. Don't you just want to break out and see the world, to not be stuck in this swamp or have to worry about people chasing you? He asked. It was like he was reading her mind. She always wanted to go out and do as she pleased. Maybe even open a shop or gallery for her artwork. I know you want to escape this place. We can go anywhere you want. I know it is scary and you probably don't trust me, but I trust you. Hell, you could have let me drown, but you didn't. And plus, I can tell you like to explore. I can see that longing in your eyes to be free. 'Cause I had that same look. Donnie sure had a way with words. She wondered if he wasn't one of her father's boys for sure. He spoke with the same charm as her father, but something told her that she could trust Donald. It was the same voice that told her to save him. Eva brought his plate to the tiny table and sat across from his empty seat. Donald watched her to see if she was thinking of going with him or thinking he was just some crazy human. He took his seat across from her. I know I must sound silly and all, since you are being immortal and undying, he spoke, but she interrupted him. I'm not immortal, I just age slower than humans. I am just as fragile as a human. Look, I know you want me to live my life to the fullest, but my life is very longer than yours. Donald, you are better off going and living on without me. To see the world, get married, have a family. The normal stuff humans do. A supernatural, we really do not worry about that too much, because we have so much time. Time to grow and develop. Yes, eventually we find ourselves someone or longing to have children, but it is not as much of a rush as if we would be human. Eva finally finished her speech and began to eat. Dawn listened to her and ate as well. Well, whatever you decide to do, then I will support it. I don't know you personally, I would like to, but I can't help but trust you and give you my life and friendship. Donald stuffed a piece of egg in his mouth and chewed. He only wanted her to get out and live a little. He knew it must be hard for her to be alone and to herself all the time. Even the most introverted people needed some sort of interaction or they would go mad. Henry Legnon made his way up the small bayou channel in a small boat. The boat was being paddled by James, his second in command, who rarely left his side. The small boat hit Eva's dock with a bang. This caused the raccoon to wake and scramble. The rustling made Eva jump from the table. The mermaid ran towards the small window. Peeking out, she could see James tying the boat as her father stood scanning the property. Hide, quickly. In the wardrobe, Evangeline turned and began pushing Donnie towards her bedroom. Wait. What is going on? He was clueless on why she was making him hide. She shushed him and began stuffing him in her large wooden wardrobe. He continued to ask questions even as the doors were closed. Eva banged and shushed him as she ran to the table to pick up the plates. Just as she tossed the plates in the sink, a loud thunderous bang was coming from her door. Eva, come now, open the door. Do not let your papa wait all day. An older raspy voice could be heard on the other side of the door, demanding to be let in. Eva let a small growl of aggravation escape her throat as she yanked the door open. Can I help you? She spoke in a sarcastic tone towards her father. Her father chuckled a bit and scratched his long black goatee. Like his hair, the goatee had a few gray hairs that peppered in it. The merman looked like he was in his early 60s, but in fact he was over 400 years old. I can't check in on my daughter? He asked, acting hurt in a dramatic way. James just stood behind Henry like a statue. Eva rolled her eyes as she stepped aside to let them in. She did not want to, but she knew they would be suspicious if she didn't let them in. Henry strolled in with his hands in his striped business suit while James followed. James wore a more average-looking apparel for the work class at that time. Worn slacks with a long-sleeved dress shirt and suspenders. James removed his longshoreman cap out of respect for Eva. Henry glanced at Eva's apartment and then at his gold pocket watch. Eva stood in front of the two wearing a long men's shirt as a nightgown. Her arms were crossed, and her messy long brown hair matched the mood expressed on her face. Dear child, why must you insist on living out here in this? Henry was a bit flashier and owned nice things. He had worked long and hard for them, so he insisted on showing them off. You know you always have a place at our home. Put away this nonsense fighting of ours and come back, huh? He tilted his head a bit. I promise not to make fun of your art career dream, and will help you get it started. You just can't get upset when, and if I sell stolen artifacts anymore, okay? It is just business, and a lot of those humans and even older supernatural love to decorate their homes. Henry tried to explain himself to his daughter, but it was in vain. Eva knew he was a crook and only cared about the business and money. Her green eyes glanced over at James, who was watching Eva. He was eerily quiet and still. He normally donned a mean and intimidating face, but when he was around Eva, he tried his best to put on a gentler one. It was no doubt he fancied the young mermaid. I'm not sure I want to come home just yet. That was a pretty horrible thing you did and said, and I'm not sure enough time has passed. Eva spoke, trying to remain calm. A silly tiff and you all huffy about this. Eva, you may be a child, but come on. Henry chuckled. I am not a child. I respect art and your dreams, if you want to call them that. Why cannot you respect mine? I don't want to be a criminal. I want a decent practical job, and you poke fun. Eva grew bold and let her hands down by her sides. Henry just stood there with a grin on his face. I told you, I was sorry. Now come back and we can talk about getting you that business. He held his hand out. No? Eva spat out. No? Henry raised a brow before looking back at James. She tells me no. He let out a half-annoyed chuckle. Stop being so stubborn, Eva, and meet me halfway here. He tried to bargain with his daughter. No, because you only came out here to offer that because you need something. I'm not stupid. Eva hisses. As the father and daughter fought, James caught a whiff of Donald. He started walking around her house trying to find where the smell was coming from. Eva noticed James walking to the wardrobe and quickly stood in front of it. Want to call off your watch, bear? This is my home, and I don't appreciate him poking about. She stood firm in front of the large man, unafraid. Her 5'4" stature did not even reach James' shoulders. He was so tall. "Sorry, Miss Eva, I just thought I smelt a human." James tried to explain himself in a polite manner. "Eva, he is just looking out for you, human." "Eva, do you have humans come here? Didn't I tell you can't really trust them?" Henry's attitude turned a bit on the annoyed, almost angry mood. "We are half human ourselves, father," she protested. "Yes, but I do not claim it, and neither should you. Humans are nothing but trouble." Henry glared at Eva. "But you do business with them," she cocked an attitude. "Taking someone's money and being buddies with them are two different things, Eva. I asked you to stay away from them for your protection. Why do you give your father such a hard time?" He pinched the bridge of his nose and closed his eyes. James turned to glance at Henry before turning back to face Eva. "What I do in my home or in general is my right. Just because you and mother split and gave you bad vibes about humans doesn't make them all bad." Eva knew she went too far bringing up her mother. The glare from her father was a bit scary. Every scarier than James could ever be. He pointed a crooked finger at her to warn her to be quiet and not to continue the next sentence. "Eva, I love you, but if you bring that woman up again," Henry tried his best to restrain himself. "I didn't come here to argue, I came to make amends. If you want to stay out here, fine. But if I find a human around here, I will kill them." He treated and turned on walk out before he said something he would regret. James glanced down at Eva and gave her a sort of "I'm sorry" look before he could speak. Henry cursed and yelled for James. James put his hat back on and walked out of Eva's home. Eva knew this was bad. She knew her father would most likely put someone watching her, and Donald would be a dead man for sure. Eva couldn't have a dead man on her conscience, and she knew Donald would not leave her side, so the only option left was to leave. The door to the wardrobe burst open and Donald fell out on the floor. Eva jumped as the thud broke the silence. She quickly closed the door and walked to Donald to help him up. "Your dad is the Henry Legnon?" he asked as he stood up straight, trying to rub out the kinks of being locked in a small wardrobe. Eva walked around him and closed the wardrobe door. "Yes, I told you this already." "Why? You know him?" she asked. "Yeah, but I didn't know you were talking about that Henry. Him and my boss exchanged goods before," Donald replied. "Then you know that we need to leave. It isn't safe here anymore, and I know you are too hard-headed to leave without me." She sighed as she searched for a suitcase amongst her treasures. Donald felt a bit awful, like he just intruded her whole life and turned it upside down. "Evangeline, I'm sorry. I didn't mean for all this to happen." He wanted to change everything, but he knew he couldn't. "It is fine, a change of scenery will be nice." She found a small suitcase and began to pack her things. "Where are we going to go?" Donald asked as he watched her. Eva shrugged a bit. "I'm not sure, I have only been around here or Galveston. Maybe just head north and see where we get. I have some money and jewelry that can pay for things, but we need to leave as soon as possible. I'm sure Henry will send someone to watch my house as soon as he gets back to his warehouse." Eva closed the stuffed suitcase and went to pick it up. Donald grabbed it and lifted it up. "Let me get dressed and we can leave." Eva was a bit sad, but it was something she needed to do. Chapter 3. It was well into midnight and pitch black as two walked down the dirt road. They were just now making it outside of New Orleans and were heading north, to where they didn't know. Donald stopped to switch the suitcase to his other hand. "You know I can carry that." Eva stopped beside him. "No, ma'am. I got it." "Well, at least let's rest. It looks like a creek over there." Eva pointed and started to walk towards the sound of running water. She lifted her white sundress and made her way through the thick grass towards the tree line. Donnie wasn't far behind. A good 10-minute walk through the woods leads them to this small bayou. Eva started to strip, and Donnie quickly turned around to give her privacy. The mermaid hopped in and her legs turned into her long snake-like tail with a large catfish-looking fin at the end. I'm going to start a fire and look for something for us to eat. Donald sat her suitcase down by the bank and then took off into the dark woods. The mermaid watched him trek off before diving under the cool water. It was such a remote bayou that there was not much trash in it. The ones around humans had a lot of litter. She reached the bottom and let her belly settle on the mud. Her hand reached out and she ran her fingers through the thick mud, but stopped when she felt something metal. Her fingers wrapped around it and she brought it with her to the surface. When she broke the water, she lifted the thing she found out of the water. It looked like a huge jeweled comb. Eva began to wipe the mud from the grooves and teeth of the comb. The mermaid was so into cleaning this newfound item she did not notice Donald coming towards the bank with his arms raised. Don stepped on a stick, causing Eva to break her concentration. Don. Fear rose in her belly as she noticed his hands up and looking at something or someone. Slowly, several women of Asian and African descent surrounded him with torches and bow and arrows in hand. One of the women spoke in another language Eva did not quite know. Her tail flicked a bit and pushed her forward slowly towards Donald. What did she say? Eva asked as she reached the bank. Another woman broke through the crowd. Her clothes and style were different from the others. Her long white hair almost glowed in the moonlight. Her geisha kimono was almost as white as her hair, but it was decorated with pink cherry blossoms. A white mask of a fox with red and black markings covered her face. She said, for him to tell his girlfriend to exit the water. The woman spoke in English but had a slight accent. She faced Eva and then turned to Donald. You are trespassing on our land. We have the right to kill you. The woman spoke. No. Eva flicked her tail, and it exited the water a bit. The woman took a step back, but the head one just lifted her mask. An Injo, Japanese for mermaid, exceedingly rare and good luck. Your girlfriend is special. The Asian woman spoke with elegance and grace. She was incredibly beautiful and had the makeup of a geisha. Eva could tell they were not humans, and the woman's white furry ears were not connected to the mask, they were hers. I'm not his girlfriend, Eva spoke as she shifted and hopped out the water. She grabbed her dress and lifted it up and put it on, all the while gripping the comb. The moonlight caught the jewel, and the glint made the leader of the group tilt her head. Where did you get that? She asked, telling the others to lower their weapons. Donald kept his hands up. He was not risking anything. I found it in the bayou. Eva looked down at the comb in her hands before glancing up at the woman. The woman's dress moved a bit, and Eva watched a few white tails poke out from under the silk kimono. Evangeline had never seen a creature quite like this woman. She had no idea what she was. The others seemed a bit normal. Eva could smell a werewolf, a fairy, and a few mixed breeds among them, but this leader, she never seen or smelt anything like her before. Give me the comb, and you may ask anything from me. The woman held out her hand. Eva inspected the woman's hand. It was pale but looked like a normal human. She then focused on the woman's dark eyes. Two sharp teeth poked out for the woman's thin lips, so she gave her a grin. We need a safe place to stay for a while. Eva did not know if she could trust these women, but at this point they had no choice. The woman gave a slight nod in agreement, and Eva slowly walked closer, giving the comb to the woman. The woman closed her hand around the comb and then turned around, walking away. Follow us, the woman commanded. Donald and Eva looked at each other with the same face of concern. Donald picked up Eva's suitcase and waited for Eva to walk. Eva took a deep breath and followed the woman. Her green eyes glanced at each woman that was surrounding them still. They did not break formation until Eva and Dawn were behind the leader of this female group of warriors. Everyone was silent as they made their way through the thick forest. Eva might have been silent, but many questions were swarming in her mind. Who were these people and what was this woman? Were they walking to their doom or safety? Evangeline wringed out her long locks and proceeded to wrap it up in a bun. The dark forest finally broke into a large clearing. It was filled with small homes and lanterns. A dirt road leads all the way down to a large building at the end. There was a small hill where a larger house sat. This was where the woman was leading them. Some of the women broke off and made their way into the different buildings. Eva guessed this was where the women lived. It was a small village that surrounded what looked to be a large warehouse. Only a couple women followed the two now. The woman stopped at the large home and turned. "I do not allow humans into my home. Please wait out here while me and the ninjas speak on terms." The woman said in the most respectful way before bowing a bit and walking in her home. She left the door open for Eva to follow. Eva turned to give Donnie an "it's okay" look before following the woman inside. The woman removed her sandals at the door, and Eva removed her boots. The inside was way bigger than the looks of the home on the out. Some kinda magic was at work here. Asian decor was spread throughout the mansion. The smell of incenses floated in the air along with paper light lanterns, as Eva followed the madam to a large room. The wood-floored room was almost bare, except for a few pillows on the ground surrounding a floor mat. On the mat were tea kettle cups and a few bowls. The woman removed her mask and sat it on the small table beside the sliding paper door. It was one of the few pieces of furniture in the room. "You are probably wondering where you are. I will explain everything to you. Please have a seat." The woman pointed to the pillows in the middle of the floor. Eva nodded and made her way towards the pillows. The mermaid sat slowly and crossed her legs in Indian style. She glanced over the porcelain cups and kettle, and she did her best not to reach out and pick them up. The Asian woman walked slowly and knelt on the pillow with grace. When she settled, the woman reached out and started to pour them both a cup of tea. Eva noticed the woman's long ears that peeked out, her hair twitch. "My name is Madame Saki Ito. I am from Japan." In the early stages of Japanese history, there were female entertainers. Saburuko, serving girls, were mostly wandering girls whose families were displaced from struggles in the late 600s. Some of these Saburuko girls sold sexual services, while others with a better education made a living by entertaining at high-class social gatherings. After the imperial court moved the capital to Heian-Kim, Kyoto, in 794, the conditions that would form geisha culture began to emerge, as it became the home of a beauty-obsessed elite. Skilled female performers, such as shirabimshai dancers, thrived. Traditional Japan embraced sexual delights, and men were not constrained to be faithful to their wives. The ideal wife was a modest mother and manager of the home. By Confucian custom, love had secondary importance. For sexual enjoyment and romantic attachment, men did not go to their wives, but to courtesans. Walled-in pleasure quarters known as ikaku were built in the 16th century, and in 1617, the shogunate designated pleasure quarters, outside of which prostitution would be illegal, and within which ikjo, play women, would be classified and licensed. The highest ikjo class was the geisha's predecessor, called teiu, a combination of actress and prostitute, originally playing on stages set in the dry Kamo riverbed in Kyoto. They performed erotic dances and skits, and this new art was dubbed kabuki, meaning to be wild and outrageous. The dances were called kabuki, and this was the beginning of kabuki theater. These pleasure quarters quickly became glamorous entertainment centers, offering more than sex. The highly accomplished courtesans of these districts entertained their clients by dancing, singing, and playing music. Some were renowned poets and calligraphers. Gradually, they all became specialized, and a new profession, purely of entertainment, arose. I worked as a geisha for 10 years until I was thrown out. I had been accused of being possessed with a spirit, and it soon led to me being banished from the town altogether, but I was born with these abilities. Kitsune is what I am. Saki poured them both a cup of tea. Evangeline was so amazed by how graceful she moved. This woman was far older than her. The mermaid kept quiet and only grabbed her cup after the other woman did. You are probably wondering what a kitsune is. Kitsune is the Japanese word for the fox. While some folktales speak of kitsune employing this ability to trick others as foxes in folklore, often do other stories portray us as faithful guardians, friends, lovers, and wives. When the humans found out what I was, they sent hunters and judges after me. I soon fled. My journey soon led me to the Americans in search of starting over. The geisha paused and began to sip her tea. Eva did the same. This woman had quite the story. Arriving here through the port of New Orleans, our kind and race wasn't very much well received. Humans were cruel, but not so much the supernatural. They were very territorial, so I moved out here. Little by little I built up this community of wayward and unwanted supernatural. Most are females, although there are some men. A lot of them are mixed breeds, not welcome in their own packs or hometowns. I took them in and protected them. Around the 1900s I created the warehouse. I needed income and mark on this land. I created a clothing factory. Most of the clothes are normal, but there are the special ones. I enchanted the clothing for other supernatural beings or human ownership. Clothes for success, love, among other things. The geisha looked over at the mermaid's damp dirty clothes. I will have to arrange for you to receive a few decent dresses, power-free of course, you and your human companion. Please do tell me how you came across him and why you were out in the bayou. The geisha inquired about the mermaid. Eva sat the warm cup of tea in her lap and began to tell the geisha her own story. Eva explained her childhood and her father. She also explained how he did not very much like humans, except to take their money, and how she ran away because of Donald. She felt sympathy for the human and how if she did not run, he would be killed because of his unwanted oath to her. The geisha sat and listened as she sipped her tea. You and your human are welcomed here, as I promised before. Finding and returning my comb, which holds most of my powers, granted you that wish. The madam explained. You are welcome here for as long as you wish. Saki bowed her head a bit. The rest of the time they had to be together they sat in silence and sipped their tea. When the two were finished, Saki rose and led Eva towards the front door. Lita will show you to your new home. The geisha's white hand pointed to the dark-skinned warrior female beside the door. Eva nodded and thanked the madam one more time before following the female. Chapter 4. Life with the geisha and her people was a bit different than Eva was used to. She had grown up around selfish pirates, but these people were so giving. They worked as a village and looked out for everyone. Most worked in the factory, while others farmed and hunted in the nearby woods. Donald's duties were mechanics and handyman in the factory. Eva also pitched in and helped with designing clothing as well as sewing. Her artistic eye was much welcomed by the geisha. It was odd being the era she grew up in was the Victorian and lastly the Roaring Twenties. The outfits went from flappers and evolved quickly. She didn't understand why, until it was explained to her about the time in town. The Madam Kitsune put up a protective barrier for her and her people. What felt like months were really years spent within the geisha's realm. The time there was different. As the world spun on at a fast pace, inside it felt like only moments. 60 years had passed, but Donald and Eva never aged. Don was still his young 20 to 30-year-old self, and Eva still looked young as well. The years outside had seen World War II as well as a lot of hardships and changes. The year out there was around the 1980s, but in this small village it felt like the 1920s still to Eva. Many people came and went, such as customers and fellow refugees, but Donald and Eva stayed and lived in harmony with the geisha and her people. The mermaid and Don's relationship grew all the while staying with the geisha. Donald deeply loved Eva and courted her like a true gentleman, however Eva was not as enthusiastic. She enjoyed spending time with Don and cared deeply for him, but the thought that he was a human was always in the back of her mind. It held her back from falling deeply in love with him. Evangeline always knew love would be hard, not only with her being a mermaid, but also because of her criminal father. As much as she refused to let herself go and fall for him, Eva didn't want to crush Don. It was her own way of caring for him, and she didn't want to crush the man's spirit. Supernatural ways were not the same as humans, and she could never explain enough for him to understand. Eva was a child of two worlds, the human and the mermaid. Mermaids were almost primordial with tribes and more animalistic. Their ways of relationships were almost the same as the basic animal instincts. No love, just the drive to reproduce and gain numbers to their ranks. Their hearts were as cold as the sea. Gaining human appearance only on the full moon, they sometimes would seek out humans to lure and mate with them or eat. Her father's mermaid mother didn't eat the father but mated with him. It was a bit taboo, but accepted to a point, that is if the child was to grow and live among the tribe, but Henry did not. However, Eva was only 1/3 mermaid, you could say. Her father was half, and her mother was fully human, so she did have a big heart when it came to others, much more than her father. The easy living paradise was short-lived. Henry Legnon had spent a lot of money and resources to find his daughter, and find her he did. Of course, the pirates made quick work of the geisha's small army, given they had modern weapons opposed to the bows and arrows hers had. Henry gathered the few warriors he left alive, and demanded them to take him to his daughter. "If you wish to live and for your madam to live, all I ask is to be brought to my daughter." He hissed at the tied-up women and few men before him. The werebear James shifted from his bear form back to his human. As he redressed, James stood beside his boss along with the other modern pirates of his crew. "Now, I just want my daughter." "Is that too much to ask for?" The prisoners kept quiet. "You can either show me, or I can just kill you and find the place for myself. Should not be too far from here, being you all are here fighting so hard." He looked at each one waiting. "Fine, death it is." He grabbed the smallest one and put a gun to her head. The leader of the small group spoke out. "Fine, I will show you." She stepped up towards Henry. Henry lowered the gun and waited for her to walk, but the woman just stood there. "Well, are we going to have a staring contest, or are you going to lead the way?" he asked, raising a brow. The woman rolled her eyes and reached for the small woman in Henry's grasp. Henry let go and the two women turned. Henry signaled for his crew to let them go and to follow them to their hideaway. 60 years. 60 years I have searched for Evangeline. She better be there, and you all better not be wasting my time," he barked. Henry was still dressed in his fancy pirate attire. Even if it was 1980. He stuck to the classic dress he grew up with. As they grew closer to the village, the geisha could make out that her warriors were not alone. Saki then knew she would have trouble coming to her doorstep. Henry stood at the foot of the village and bellowed in a deep raspy voice. "Where's your leader? Tell him to come out and greet me so that we can speak." Henry's loud voice echoed through the village. Eva heard her father's voice, and her heart sank. Donald dropped what he was holding and ran for the door to their small home. He peeked out the door. He was about to run towards Henry, but Saki stopped him. Her pale hand gripped his shoulder with force. "No, human, you do not need to speak on my behalf, nor get yourself slain." Eva gripped Ani's shirt as he stepped out the door. "My father, he has found me. Madam Saki, he will not hesitate to kill everyone to get what he wants. He is a conman and liar, as well as a murderer. I should have never, but before she could continue the geisha shushed her. I made a promise to give you sanctuary. We will figure this out, child. And with that she turned and made her way towards Henry and his group of pirates. Evangeline and Donald were not far behind her, both sporting a fearful but angered face. May I help you? Saki spoke with elegance and a soft voice. Henry placed his hands in his suit pockets and puffed his chest out a bit. James hovered behind his boss with a scowl. I came here for my daughter, he ordered. Sorry, but I am not leaving. Eva came up and stood beside the madam with crossed arms. Eva, I have been looking for you for 60 years, child. Why have you given your father such grief? He spoke with a frown, but it soon turned to anger when he saw the human come to stand beside her. You left because of him, Evangeline. I am most disappointed in you, young lady. Henry spoke in a harsh tone as the bear let out a growl. I am my own being and do not need your permission, father. If you were more compassionate towards humans, Eva did not know why she was explaining. He did not deserve an explanation. It was her life, not his. You uproot your whole life and well-being along with safety for him. Henry pointed as his brows raised and settled in an angry position. You see why I do not approve of them. They always try and rule your life, he hissed. Well, since you want to do this and act this way, I think it is time for me to intervene. Eva, I tried my best to let you live your life, but I will not see you waste it with this human. Henry went to command his men to seize her, but the madam stepped in front of her. Perhaps we may work out an agreement. I have a warehouse along with a harbor to the main bayou that runs alongside your port. The geisha spoke. She did not want harm to come to anyone on her grounds, but she wanted Henry to learn a lesson as well. A scheme of her own was brewing. Madam Saki, no, you can't, Eva protested. Hush, Eva, the grown-ups are talking. Henry was intrigued. The geisha turned to Eva and gave her a warm smile. Do not fret, my dear, his greed will be his downfall. Play along, and you will gain his respect, as well as be free of him. The madam gave a sharp toothy grin as she turned to face Henry. May we speak? I am sure we can benefit each other in this trade, and not start a war between each other. Saki asked. Eva would play along if it meant her father getting a taste of his own medicine, and being brought down a level. Eva remembers Saki telling the stories of kitsunes and their ways of trickery. Many did this to teach greedy men a lesson, and this merman was going to get a dose of that. Eva turned to glance up at Dawn with soft eyes. Just go along with everything, okay? Donald did not like this one bit. He wanted to protest, but knew he had no say in the matter. Henry motioned for his men to keep an eye on everyone as he followed the madam to her home. Meanwhile, Eva stood beside Donald. She tried her best to ignore James' death glare on Dawn. The women that the pirates were holding finally were able to head back to their homes, while everyone was doing their best to remain calm. The meeting was very lengthy, and it was killing Eva not to know everything that was going on. The mermaid had been through many things in life, but this was one of the most frustrating. She just wanted to have her own life with whomever she wanted. She knew that this life with the fox was only temporary. Eva knew this day would come. Her father was always around to ruin a good thing in her life. After what seemed like hours, the merman and geisha emerged from her home. Boys, let us settle in, but no funny business. We are guests, so I expect good behavior. He glared at him before turning to Eva. He walked towards her and stopped a few feet away. Me and Madam Saki have reached an agreement. She will allow us to use her warehouse to store shipments, as well as use her bayou to run merchandise. However, this will take some time to set up, so it looks like we will be roommates. He grinned. Are you serious? Eva tried her best to remain calm. Be lucky he is still alive. Henry pointed to Donald, who stood behind her. 1 week later, as Henry and his pirates began setting up shop in the village, James approached his boss. James knew Henry did not like his daughter with the human, so he asked for his daughter's hand. The bear had always fancied Eva and wanted to marry her the very day he laid eyes on her. He only reformed asking due to Henry being his boss, and the fact Eva might not accept, but now the circumstances were different. Henry was seething his daughter left with a human, and James could ask for her hand. She would not pass up the chance to save the human. It was the ultimatum that would benefit James and his boss. He could be rid of Dawn, and Eva would have no choice to be by his side. James pulled his boss aside and explained everything to him. Henry laughed at first but went serious when he noticed how James reacted to his laughter. The merman was a bit surprised the bear wanted the rebel mermaid, but if he trusted anyone with his daughter, it was James. Henry granted permission to James, but knew they had to be crafty about the whole thing. Eva would not just give in. The mermaid needed to be pushed. The human had to die no matter what. The kitsune accepts the challenge to trick and bring Henry down on his ego and respect his daughter, but Eva had no clue what that trick was. The mermaid just went along with the fox. She knew she had no choice. It was either this or face the wrath of her father. It was going well until her father approached her with an absurd question. "Evangeline, my dear," his raspy voice spoke softly. She knew he wanted something due to his demeanor. "Father." She tried to remain respectful. The brunette stood there with her arms crossed. "I have a preparation for you, James. The boy fancies you, Eva. And it would do a great deal to our business if—" "You mean your business? This is yours as much as mine." "I don't want it, Evangeline. This is our family business. Even if you like it or not, those are the facts." Henry began to get stern with her. "You don't understand or appreciate it now, but this is your legacy. You will do this." He tried to sugarcoat in explaining that the deal he wanted to do with James was a family deal when it had nothing to do with that. Henry only cared for Henry and his precious business. He loved his daughter, but he used her a lot. Eva was fed up with that, and it was the reason she left to begin with, on top of the fact of the human. "If you do not agree to marry James, that human of yours, I will string him up by his toes and feed him to the sharks." Henry hisses. Tears formed in the corner of her eyes. How could her father be this cruel and demanding of her? It was not about Dawn so much, but the fact he would make her do something she didn't want to for his own gain. How he used her in this way hurt her far worse than the threat of the human. Eva would play along for a while with her father, but she doesn't love James. She has feelings for Dawn, but knows it is wrong to love the human. It would only leave her heart broken in the end. When Donald would grow old and die, Eva would remain, but she would not settle for the bear. He was detestable and a brute. She would not allow her father to push such a thing on her. When the chance would arise, she would escape not only from this place, but out of her father's grasp again. She was tired of him just using her for his gain. Enough was enough. Evangeline turned and stormed off back to her small home. As Eve entered the home, she slammed the door behind her. Donald came from the bathroom area when he heard the slam. Shaving cream was still fresh on his chin as he approached her. "Eva, what is wrong?" he asked. He could see on her face she was upset. Eva glanced up at Dawn for a moment before wrapping her arms around herself. "My father." She spoke softly as her green eyes were on the floor. She could not look at Donald. "What about him?" he asked. Eva sighed. She had to tell him. "He is forcing me to marry James," she blurted out. She did not keep things from Donald. She trusted him and told him everything. Even if he was human, he was the only human she trusted. Donald used the towel that was draped on his shoulder to wipe the shaving cream off his face before walking to the door. Eva stepped in front of him. "Dawn." "No." Eva placed a hand on his chest. "Evangeline. Enough is enough. All your father does is try and use you. He warped your mind and taught you that humans are bad all these years. On top of the fact, he only comes around when he needs you to do something. You can't see that. I do Dawn, but he is powerful and has many powerful friends. If I don't play along, he can make life worse for me. For you, he already has. Dawn spit out. You can't even tell me you love me because of this. I know you do. I do Donald, but I can't allow myself to. You are human. You are mortal and will age and die while I live on. I can't let that happen. Why? You can't tell me you are that selfish like your father. No. You deserve a normal human to live and grow old with. Not me. I don't want anyone else. I just want you. Eva was speechless for a moment. She would not let Donald continue to throw his life away for her. Well, we can't always get what we want. And with that she exited the house. She stormed down the small street towards the tree line. Eva needed to go for a swim to clear her mind. Donald went to follow her, but Sika stopped him. It will not help Donald. She used her fan to tap his shoulder. Why not? I was always taught to fight for what I believe in and love. Yes, and fight you will. She used her other hand to reach into her kimono and retrieve a veil. The pink liquid inside swirled as she handed it to him. When the time comes, drink this. It will give you the strength to defeat the bear. She explains. Donald reached out slowly and took it. You must defeat the bear and you and that mermaid must leave. I enjoyed having you here, but you will not be able to have a life here now that your father has discovered you too. If we leave he will just come after us again. Not necessary. He cares more for his business than his daughter. This whole time he has been here, his business has been without him. You know the time difference, she hinted to Donald her plan. You wish to ruin his empire while he is here. That is what you wanted to do to humble him this whole time. Keep him here distracted and not tell him about the time spell you have. Yes. Exactly. She nodded and opened the fan to fan herself. Donald smirked a bit as he looked at the vial of potion. I don't know how to thank Mrs. Saki. You have given us not only sanctuary, but now this. It is only the right thing to do. No need to thank me, she said before turning to walk back to her home on the hill. The sun began to set on this small village. As the natural light faded, the mechanical ones lit up the night. Most of the villagers stayed inside to avoid dealing with the intruding pirates that occupied the place, but Don was not one of them. He knew as well as Saki that someone needed to stand up to them. A debate was out of the question. These people only understood two things: money or violence. Saki did not have much on the money side of things, but her magic could help Ani be the champion she and Eva needed now. Saki knew Eva would not stand up to her father, but she knew Dawn would. That was the reason Saki gave the potion to him. Dawn was outside the small restaurant they had in the village. It was like the classic street vendors in Japan with an open kitchen. He sat on the bar stool and watched the few pirates pass by. Dawn perked up when he noticed Eva passing by. He watched her wringing out her hair and wrapping it into a bun. She had been spending a lot more time in the water and avoiding him lately. As she walked down the main street in front of him, he watched James turn the corner and stop in front of her. Donnie stood up from his seat as he gripped his cup, doing his best to refrain from going after James. He watched the two exchange a few words. Eva was uncomfortable. He could tell by the way she shifted in place. What drove him over the edge was when James reached for her hand. Donald reached in his pocket for the vial Saki gave him a few days ago, popped the cork and downed it. He dropped his cup in his hands and the vial to the dirt as he marched towards them. Donald put himself between Eva and James, glaring. Donald. It is okay. Eva tried to calm him down, but it was useless. Donald pushed James back. The bear growled and took a swing at Donald. Donald ducked and jabbed the bear in the side. James stumbled back and was about to attack when Henry rushed over to stop him. What is going on here? Henry barked. You and me, we settle this. Winner gets Eva. Donald growled. Eva glared and crossed her arms. I am not a prize, she hisses. Henry shushes her and smiles between the two men. Two men can settle this with a good old-fashioned fight. Winner can be with Eva and will have no objections from me. Henry did not know Saki gave Dawn the potion. All the merman knew is the fact James was a brawler and supernatural compared to a human. This fight could settle everything for him. This is ridiculous, Eva shouted. No, Eva. I am fed up with your dad and his goon messing up your life. This is the only way to settle this. Donald kept his eyes on James. James glared back without saying a word. No, it is alright, Evangeline. James, time for you to put this human in his place. Henry leaned in to whisper to James. Kill him. The merman commanded James as he smiled over to Dawn. I am sure you all are ready for some good sportsmanship. A fight between these two should lift everyone's spirits. Henry spoke out loud to his people and Saki's. Eva shook her head and tried to stop Donald, but her father caught her by the arm. Let them fight, my dear. Henry glared at her as she watched Donald. She tried to protest but was helpless to stop it all. Eva knew James could kill Donald, but she was powerless to stop this. If she tries to stop them, restrain her. Henry told his men as he let Eva go. The villagers and pirates circled around James and Dawn as they prepared themselves to fight. Dawn took his shirt off and tossed it to the side. He wrapped his knuckles in bandages and jumped up and down, waiting to fight James. I want this fight clean. Henry walked between the two. I will also be taking up bets. He winks and makes his way to the other side of the circle. James walked to the middle and glared at Donald. Donald approached and returned the scowl. Donald glanced away for a moment to see Eva in the crowd. Her face was written with concern. This temporary distraction gave James a window. He swung at Donald, but Donald ducked and punched James in the jaw with all his might. The bear went down and shook his head to clear it. James was not expecting the human to hit him that hard. Humans never hit this hard, they had no chance against his kind. Something else was going on, but James was too blinded with rage to care. He slowly peeled himself from the dirt ground. He spat the blood from his mouth and raised his knuckles. The two males began to fight, each man hitting each other lick of lick. Both began bleeding. James became aggressive and started to punch Donald like crazy. Donald blocked him as the bear began to wear himself out. Donald took the jabs to his stomach and sides, buying time. He needed to tire the bear out. Donald was smaller than the large bear, so he needed to outlast him. The crowd's cheers mixed with the sound of the bear's knuckles against Don's body rang loud. Donald threw a few punches in, but mostly blocked the bear's hits. Donald tried to continue on, but the hits were taking its toll. Donald fell down to the ground. James backed up and waited for him to get back up. As Donald sat there, he glanced around at everyone. He noticed Eva with her hands on her face in distress. She was so worried about Dawn. He knew he had to do this for her. She needed to be free from her father, and he was going to die trying. He stood up and raised his knuckles. He was barely holding on. His movements swayed and blood was pouring down his face. James jabbed him in the side and Donald tried to block, but it made him stumble. James then used all his might to uppercut Dawn. Dawn went airborne and fell backwards onto the ground. He landed with a thud. Even though he had the potion, James was still strong. The potion only gave him an equal chance. However, the bearer was more adapted and skilled in fighting like this. The hit was so hard he could feel himself drifting like the time he was tossed in the water. His limp body sank into that swamp, and he could feel himself sink into unconsciousness. Just like the night Eva saved him from drowning. Everything went quiet, and as he was about to succumb to the dark waters when he heard Eva's voice yell his name. His eyes snapped open, and out of the descent, Dawn shot up with speed from the ground and hit James so hard in the face the bear fell to the ground knocked out. The villagers cheered and the pirates cursed. The mob swarmed each other, and Eva broke away from her father into the crowd. She bent down and grabbed Dawn. She lifted his arm over her shoulders and almost dragged him away. "What were you thinking? You were almost killed. How were you not killed?" Evangeline fussed the whole time the two made their way out the village and towards the water. And the two fled. Eva reached the backs to the bayou and glanced back towards the village. She had to make a choice. Continue with Donald on the run or go back with her father. The sound of her name on Donald's lips and the sound of a gunshot woke her from her trance. She pushed Donald into the water and followed him. Henry had taken a gun out and shot it in the air. The crowd stopped fighting and dispersed. A few villagers ran as the pirates stopped fighting to look at their captain. Saki stepped forwards with her fan in front of her face. "The match is over. Eva is free to leave with Dawn. It was the deal." Saki spoke up. Henry cursed and placed his gun back in his jacket. He ran a hand over his goatee and cursed again. "Yes. A deal is a deal." Henry was about to continue to speak, but his attention was brought to a stranger running towards him. He was dressed like a modern pirate, but he was not one of his men. "Mr. Legnon," the male yelled. "Yes, what do you want, boy?" he bellowed. "I am so glad I found you." The male slid to a halt. He tried to catch his breath, but Henry was impatient. "What do you want, boy? Speak." He glared. "Your son Henry Jr. sent me to find you. He and your business partners have been looking for you for over a year and a half now." "What do you mean? I have only been here a week or two." Henry was confused at the man's words. He then turned to the kitsune and glared. "You witch." It had taken Henry a moment, but he figured out the time difference. She was keeping him here so his business would fail, but luckily for him his son came back to help when the news of his father's disappearance. Henry took out his gun and shot the fox in the stomach. "Burn the place to the ground. Kill everyone," he yelled to his men. Eva held onto Dawn as she swam up north, swimming up the bayou and out of the kitsune's territory. She surfaced a few times for him to breathe, but would not swim above water until she knew she was far enough away. When the mermaid was certain they were far enough away, she surfaced. She used her powers and healed Donnie with the waters that surrounded them. "That was so stupid of you, Donald. The fox gave me a potion. It gave me the strength to fight him," he explained as he treaded water beside her. "Just barely." "What were you thinking?" "I was thinking of you. You need to be free of him, Eva." He was right, but she did not want to admit it. She was going to get Donald killed. His love and devotion to her was deadly for him. "Come on, we need to get out of here." The two swam a little further until Eva spotted a town ahead. "We need to get us some new clothes and find out what year it is." Eva remembered the time displacement that kept the village safe. They need to find out about this new era and new ways of life. They needed to do this quickly if they were to survive. The two exited the bayou and made their way through the small patch of woods. They stopped when they reached a home nestled between the forest and a road. Eva noticed a clothesline with clothes hanging to dry. She quickly grabbed a shirt for Donald, a dress for her, and towels for them. The two dried off and changed, ditching the old clothes. They then made their way down the road towards town. The town was small, but Eva could tell a big difference between the 1920s to now. She bent down to glance inside a newspaper holder to read the date. 1986. She read out loud as she stood up straight again. Wow, the fox was not lying about the time displacement. Donald glanced around the small town. "I am gonna go to that diner and see if I can get us some food." "With what money?" Eva asked. I don't know, maybe they can give me some info or a job or something. I need to just figure out what to do next, okay? Stay here. I will be back. Donald looked both ways before he crossed the street toward the diner. Eva stood there watching him with her arms crossed. Eva watched Don enter the diner before her attention was drawn to a bus stopping a few feet away from her. The doors opened and people began to walk out. Eva knew this was her chance. She had to leave. The mermaid did not want Donald to lose his life having to be on the run. She wanted him to be happy and find someone, a human. She also did not want to see him die as she lives on in a constant state of heartache. She quickly made her way to the bus and got on board. This was better for both of them. He would not have to serve her anymore. His life could start over anew. She walked to the back and took a seat on the bus. Her green eyes scanned the diner across the street before turning to look down at her lap. In her head she told herself repeatedly this was for the best. Chapter 5, 1990. Eva entered the small clinic holding her side. She adjusted to the new times and life without Donald well enough, but she was still on the run from her father. The mermaid had settled in the northern part of Louisiana and tried to keep low working for a local art gallery, but her past soon caught up to her. The clinic she entered was for the supernatural. The supernatural was still an underground thing, and not out in the open, but the layers were slowly peeling back, and a few were coming out to humans. The judges did their best to keep this from happening, but it was no use. Soon enough the supernatural world would surface. It was only a matter of time. Eva was not on the bandwagon. She kept herself hidden and did her best not to get close to humans. She worked with them, yes, but she hid her true nature. Eva rested on the counter of the empty clinic. The nurse behind the desk stood up as she looked Eva over with concern. "Are you okay, miss?" the nurse asked. "No, is this a safe place for my kind?" she asked. The nurse's eyes flashed an amber color. "Yes, ma'am. Let me get you into a room." "Shelley, call the doctor." The nurse rushed to help Eva. The nurse helped Eva towards the back. Blood dripped behind her, making a trail down the white tiled floor. The nurse helped Eva onto the examination bed. Eva groans as she lays back, still clutching her side. The nurse reached behind her to grab some gloves. Suddenly the door to the room opened. Eva looked up to see a male dressed in black with a horrible plague doctor-like mask. It was black leather that came to a point like a bird beak. Eva had never seen anything like it in her life, and it startled her a bit. Instead of the white coats normal doctors wore, he wore a long black one. His whole attire was black, and he adjusted his leather gloves as he approached. Eva flinched and moved a little bit higher on the bed. She was in pain, but this said doctor's appearance was intimidating. The doctor stopped in front of the bed and spoke. "Giovanni da Ventura at your serve, ma'am." He lifted up his mask to show his human face, but smiled to show his vampire fangs. Giovanni had large blue eyes, dark hair, and he sported a 5 o'clock shadow. He was very handsome, and his charming smile caused Eva to calm down a bit. "What happened?" he asked as he lowered his mask and walked to the side of her. She moved her hands and allowed him to examine her bleeding side. "I was attacked." She grunts in pain. "I see that. Nurse, get me something to clean this up." He commanded the nurse as he slowly lifted Eva's shirt up, so he could see the whole wound. The mermaid winced as he continued to examine her. "Species?" He looked up to face Eva. "I am a mermaid," she replied. "Really? I don't think I ever came across a mermaid. I normally can heal myself with water, but whatever he stabbed me with, I can't." She grunts. "Most likely a silver blade." He guessed as the nurse came back with a gaze and utensils for him to sew her up. He took the syringe and numbed her wound before he continued to work on her. "Where are you from? I am sorry I never got your name." He spoke as he tried to get her mind off her wound. My name is Evangeline. I am from South Louisiana but moved out here. She tried to give him as little info as she could. Eva did not know if he knew or worked for Henry or not. I see. Well, I am from Pavia, Italy. Eva did notice a slight accent. I used to have a thick accent, but since I have lived in the States so long, I soon lost it. He explained to her. How are you feeling? Are you still in pain? He asked. Eva shook her head. No, it is better now. The mermaid settled down and became calm. She refrained from watching him clean and sew up her wound. Are you going to be okay? Did you report the attack? Giovanni asked as she began to stitch her wound. No, I didn't. I am not sure if the law enforcement around her helps our kind or not. The doctor let out a chuckle. Well, there are a few police who are like us in the department. They can surely help you if you want. I don't want to pry into your life, but I also don't want to have to keep patching you up. He joked. It was a poor joke and a bit harsh Shiva though, but she forced a smile on her face. I am sorry, was that a bit harsh? He looked up at the nurse. I am sorry, sometimes I can come off a bit brash. He explained to Eva as he looked back down to work. No, it is fine. Eva smiled down at him as she held her shirt up for him to sew her wound. All done. You will need to stay here overnight so I can make sure that heals up. He removed his gloves and mask. Eva was relieved he took the mask off finally. Eva winces as he places her shirt down. Eva tried to sit up a bit, but he placed a hand on her shoulder. Rest up. Please stay. I would like to ask you some questions if you don't mind. What kind of questions? She raised a brow a bit concerned. She did not want him to get invoiced with her and her drama. Oh, just some questions about your species. You are the first mermaid I ever met. He explained. I suppose that will be fine. Don't worry. I won't intrude in your business. He pointed to her wound, letting her know he didn't care about the trouble she was in. Giovanni was curious about her kind. Thank you. And yes, I will answer your questions. Prefect. Rest up. I will come back in the morning. Wait, aren't you a vampire? She asked before she left. Yes, I am. So, don't vampires burn in the sun? She asked. Giovanni smiled warmly at her. What kind of doctor would I be if I didn't find a cure for that? Get some rest, Miss Evangeline. He then turned to walk out the room. The next day, Giovanni knocked before walking into the room. Eva was sitting up in the bed and looking out the window. Good morning, Miss Evangeline. Giovanni slowly entered the room in a three-piece suit. It was all black except for a red tie that was tucked into his vest. A strange outfit for a doctor to wear. How so? He lifted a brow. Normal doctors wear scrubs and such. She explained. He gave her a warm smile and shook his head. I am not a normal human doctor. I deal in the supernatural mostly. Not many come and go in here. Supernatural mostly can care for themselves, but at times, like your case, a hunter or judge, or other supernatural creature attacks, and they can heal themselves. My time is spent more in other areas. What was the worst case you ever heard? The werewolf that was cursed with the mange by a witch. He chuckled. Oh, why? You ever tried to apply a magical ointment on a huge 7-foot dog as it tries to scratch? The cone of shame doesn't help much. What other areas? What is that? Giovanni asked. You said your time is spent in other areas. Oh yes, I do help a few human doctors from time to time. Those who wish to work with our kind. I also dabble in the pharmacies. He explained. So, are you going to tell me what the deal is about that creepy mask? Eva had to ask. Giovanni walked towards her and began to examine her wound. I was a plague doctor. He then begins to explain his life to her. He figured if he opens up about himself, she would be more comfortable to open up to him. The Black Death, also known as the Great Plague, the Black Plague, or simply the Plague, was one of the most devastating pandemics in human history, resulting in the deaths of an estimated 75 to 200 million people in Eurasia, and peaking in Europe from 1347 to 1351. The bacterium Yersinia pestis, which results in several forms of plague, is believed to have been the cause. The plague created a series of religious, social, and economic upheavals, which had profound effects on the course of European history. The Black Death is thought to have originated in the dry plains of Central Asia, where it then traveled along the Silk Road, reaching Crimea b. 1343. From there, it was most likely carried by oriental rat fleas living on the black rats that were regular passengers on merchant ships, spreading throughout the Mediterranean and Europe. The Black Death is estimated to have killed 30–60% of Europe's total population. In total, the plague may have reduced the world population from an estimated 450 million down to 350–375 million in the 14th century. It took 200 years for the world population to recover to its previous level. The plague recurred as outbreaks in Europe until the 19th century. A plague doctor was a medical physician who treated victims of the bubonic plague. In times of epidemics, such physicians were specifically hired by towns where the plague had taken hold. Since the city was paying their salary, they treated everyone, both the wealthy and the poor. However, some plague doctors were known to charge patients and their families additional fees for special treatments and/or false cures. Typically, they were not professionally trained nor experienced physicians or surgeons, but rather they were often either second-rate doctors unable to otherwise run a successful medical practice or young physicians seeking to establish themselves. These doctors rarely cured their patients, rather, they served to record a count of the number of people contaminated for demographic purposes. Plague doctors by their covenant treated plague patients, and were known as municipal or community plague doctors, whereas general practitioners were separate doctors, and both might be in the same European city or town at the same time. In France and the Netherlands, plague doctors often lacked medical training, and were referred to as empirics. In one case, a plague doctor had been a fruit salesman before his employment as a physician. In the 17th, 18th, and 19th centuries, some doctors wore a beak-like mask which was filled with aromatic items. The masks were designed to protect them from putrid air, which, according to the miasmatic theory of disease, was the cause of infection. The design of these costumes has been attributed to Charles de Lorme, the chief physician to Louis XIII. Plague doctors served as public servants during times of epidemics, starting with the Black Death of Europe in the 14th century. Their principal task, besides taking care of people with the plague, was to record in public records the deaths due to the plague. In certain European cities like Florence and Perugia, plague doctors were requested to do autopsies to help determine the cause of death and how the plague played a role. Plague doctors became witnesses to numerous wills during times of plague epidemics. Plague doctors also gave advice to their patients about their conduct before death. This advice varied depending on the patient, and after the Middle Ages, the nature of the relationship between doctor and patient was governed by an increasingly complex ethical code. Giovanni moved to Pavia to treat plague patients. He was fresh out of school and desired to start a medical career. He became a plague doctor for the city of Pavia, which involved a 16-clause contract with the city. The salary he received was 30 florins per month, plus full citizenship and a free house, which was 5 to 6 times the salary of a skilled person of the time. The average skilled person earned about 60 florins per year, where Ventura received 360 florins per year. Ventura was also to receive an adequate completely furnished house in an adequate location with supplemental living costs. He also received a cash advance and a severance package when he left at the end of his contract, which consisted of 2 months' pay. He was not to require a fee from a plague patient, since the town was paying him, unless they offered freely. If the town had too many plague victims that his salary was not obtainable, then he was free to leave with no further obligations. Likewise, if he received pay and died before his normal services were performed, his heirs were not obligated to return any of that advance pay. The most important of the benefits of his contract with the city was a full town citizenship, as he had immigrated to the area from the countryside. He was not initially a town citizen. This gave him the possibility of setting up a more lucrative practice in the city after his contract ended. This benefit was the most attractive to him. In return for the contract benefits, he was to treat and take care of all plague and infectious patients of the town. He was to see the plague patients 2 or 3 times per day or more if necessary. Ventura was not to go around the city unless escorted by a designated city member, so as not to spread the contagious disease. Ventura could see only bubonic plague patients, and was prohibited from seeing other patients with other illnesses. This was covered in Clause 16 of his 1479 contract with the city of Pavia. As a professional doctor of that time, Ventura was to uphold certain standards. These included ethical codes and professional dress. He was to be well-mannered, bold, cautionary of dangers, and not practice false cures. Additionally, Ventura was expected to be friendly, cordial, polite, compassionate, chaste, sober, and merciful. He was to work with his colleagues and be kind-hearted to them. He was also to be wise and professional in his prognostications. Likewise, he was not to be greedy for money. His dress was to be like that of a professional clerk of the time. He was not to swear or use bad language, and was not allowed to double talk or give ambiguous answers. In addition, Ventura was to be courteous at the city major's table, and kind to the guests. He was to be a man of few words. Ventura was to treat his patients with dignity and high moral standards, especially his female patients. He was not to have chit-chat conversations with the mistress of the house, the daughter, or the female servants. The plague doctor eventually turned vampire due to the many experiments he did on the people and corpses. Giovanni was a dedicated doctor and worked tirelessly looking for the cure for the plague. One night he found a vampire and asked the male why he was not sick like the others. The vampire explained to him what he was, but Giovanni did not believe him. The vampire gave him a vial of his blood as proof before disappearing. The doctor did a few experiments and even injected himself with concoction he made with the vampire blood. This resulted in him becoming a vampire like the male who gave him the blood. Soon Ventura left the city after it fell into complete ruin due to the plague. Rumors spread that he went mad and set the whole town on fire. The doctor then began his long journey on trying to fight the animalistic bloodlust of the vampire curse, as well as hold up his moral code of a doctor. Throughout history, Giovanni has studied medicine as well as human supernatural anatomy and disease. Giovanni is a great doctor but at times can be malicious. He struggles between his old human life morals and his vampire side. The wealthy vampire doctor till this day practices medicine and surgeries. Giovanni set up a few clinics around the state since his journey there during the beginnings of the United States. He had recently moved down south to open this new clinic. The southern states were lacking care for the supernatural. Evangeline listened to his story and figured he was in no way related to anything dealing with her father. The mermaid took a deep breath and began to explain her life to him. Eva knew he wanted to know about her species, but to be honest, she didn't know much. She only knew what her body was capable of due to the only other mer person she was around was her father. He had explained to her a few times that true mermaids were water restricted and not allowed to go on land unless they needed to feed. Eva explained she could heal herself with water, and this caught the attention of the doctor. He perked up in the chair and asked her to explain more. One of my abilities is I can use water to heal. I am not sure exactly how it works. You can heal yourself or others by using water. By absorbing water molecules and transferring medicament into the body at a molecular level, or having water molecules to repair and regenerate damaged cells and molecules. He stood up explaining and pacing the room a bit. He stopped mid-step and turned to face her. His face lit up with a smile as he approached her bedside. "Evangeline, can you consider staying here with me and aiding with patients?" he asked. "I am not sure I understand." Eva rose a brow. "You have a unique gift of healing, and you could use this gift to help others. Other supernatural or humans possibly, for a fee of course," he added. She was a bit shocked about the request. She was not expecting a question like that. I am not sure." Her eyes left his blue ones as she was a bit taken back by the request. Evangeline was used to being by herself, definitely not helping injured beings. "Of course. Silly of me to ask, but please, think it over. This mermaid could help him greatly in his business. She would be paid handsomely, of course, as well as protection from her father's people. Giovanni knew power people and creatures. Old gods and new ones. The vampire would be a powerful ally for the mermaid, but Eva was a bit reluctant to trust again. "I will think it over." Chapter 6, 2000, Death. It was something Giovanni didn't quite understand but respected it. Throughout the centuries the doctor marveled at the body and its mechanics, especially trying to learn what made things live or not live. In the many experiments done on others as well as himself, he learned of a method to preserve life, or become like the undead. A vampire of sorts. He thrived off the living blood of others to sustain his own life to keep studying the body. Giovanni was not a nice man, nor did he possess the best bedside manner. He was arrogant and prideful, thinking at times he was like a god having the power of life and death. The same mentality most doctors had, but this was heightened due to the fact he did almost have the cure for death. The birth of his curiosity and love for death and life grew from the Black Plague. Death was all around him and there was no defeating this foe, so he wanted to learn from it. At times Giovanni could come off as cruel, but it was more of a tell it like it is personality. He was a no-nonsense guy and only did things to benefit himself. The doctor was a borderline psychopath, but unlike a psychopath at times he had a conscience. Giovanni had the pleasure of growing through the ages. He watched kingdoms rise and fall as well as mankind and supernatural thrive and die. The only key factor that was constant was the body, its elements, disease, and death. All something Geo studied and learned throughout the ages. Modern life was a bit better, with all its advanced tech, but the body was still the same. Still just flesh and blood and bone and no material. What new technologies or breakthroughs humans or supernatural created, they would always need a doctor. All his life he kept busy with medical and cures, and never stopped to have a relationship. The mermaid had begun to change him subtly. He was kind and thoughtful around her. The two had begun to date 5 years after she agreed to help him in his clinics. The mermaid was wined and dined in the fanciest of places. Giovanni took her all over the world in his travels to different cities to aid the supernatural beings both rich and old. Evangeline enjoyed helping others as well as being able to see the world. Giovanni treated her with such compassion and respect, Eva was slowly falling in love with him. He was well educated, passionate, respectable, a man of class. Another 5 years in and the two became romantic and intimate with each other. She shared her secrets and he even told her of a brother he had lost. Something he never told anyone. The relationship had its ups and downs like any. The issue of her father was brought up a bit. Eva was afraid Henry would find out about Giovanni and use them as well as she was afraid to marry and completely settle down. Giovanni would get angry at her for that. He told her she didn't need her father's approval in everything, and she needed to just live her life. At times Giovanni would be gone for days to deal with business. It often got to her not know what he was doing, but she trusted his commitment to her. The vampire was loyal to the mermaid, but the business or experiments he dealt without her, he knew she would not approve. For a supernatural creature, she had too much compassion. He both loved and hated it about her. His business had only lately become a problem when she started to become suspicious. Bodies of humans and a few supernatural creatures had been found with their blood drained. The mermaid's suspicions were confirmed when she walked in on him doing the experiments. Eva stood there holding the door with one hand as her other gripped her mouth to not scream. She knew he was a vampire and needed blood to survive, but this was savagery. This was not for food, this was for his experiments. He called it science, she called it torture and butchery. He turned to face her and removed his mask. He was a bit shocked she had just walked into his study. Eva. He dropped the instruments and rushed to close the door behind her. She stood there speechless as she eyed the body on the table. She watched as life left the poor man. What have I told you about coming down here while I am working? He tried to remain calm, but his voice was strained, and he tried to contain his anger. He finally turned towards her direction. Her back was to him and she was frozen in shock. He reached out and spun her around quickly to face him. Eva. He raised his voice. Eva smacked him in the face out of reaction. He let her arms go and glared at her. His blue eyes were wide and filled with anger. Don't Eva me. What is that? She pointed to the body on the table. Giovanni popped his jaw and grinded his teeth, doing his best not to yell at her. I told you. I had work to do. He spoke through clenched teeth. That. She turned again to glance at the man before turning back to him. That is not work. Are you the one responsible for all those bodies? He didn't reply. He stood there, eyeing her in anger. Giovanni. She yelled. It caused him to snap a bit. He grabbed her arms tightly and shocked her a bit. Eva, I told you not to come down here. He knew how she felt about this type of stuff, and he did his best to hide his savage side from her, but now the cat was out of the bag. Eva was shaken a bit before she pushed off and out of his grip. Tears streamed down her cheeks. How could you? That poor man. You are so barbaric. Oh, come now Eva, stop pretending. We are not human. I'm a vampire, you are a mermaid. Yes, it is savage, but I do not pretend to be something I am not. You try to be compassionate like humans, but you despise them. What sense does that make? He screamed. I don't go around butchering them. This is horrible, Giovanni. How could you? I am trying to learn the secret to life. The blood, the body, he argued. You are just like my father. Eva spat out. Oh please. I never met the man and I hate him. He keeps you in fear and under his pull, and you are not even around him anymore. He rolled his eyes. Eva went to walk past him, but he grabbed her again. He was about to speak, but the two attention was drawn to the pounding on the door. Go away. I am busy. Giovanni yells. I can't do that. Judge Bryce. Let me adventure. Michael spoke from the other side of the door. The judge had been called in to investigate the recent bodies that kept turning up. Listen to me. He pulls Eva close and cups her face. I love you. You know that, right? He asked. She nodded as she stood there in fear. You need to leave. Run. If they catch you here, they will for sure lock you up with me. Go. Get away quickly. He planted a kiss on her lips before pushing her away towards the large window on the other side of the door. Another loud bang caused her to jump out of her daze. She tossed off her heels and climbed out the window quickly. Giovanni waited till she was out the window before yelling again. His fang teeth popped out as he bared his teeth towards the door. "Go away, Judge. Don't test me," he screams, but the screams were in vain. Michael kicked in the large wooden door and stood in the doorway holding his gladius sword tightly. "Let me guess, you aren't going to come quietly." Michael sighed as she watched Giovanni pull out his surgeon's scalpel. The young judge's eyes glanced at the body on the table and shook his head in disappointment. Giovanni rushed him, slashing towards the judge. Michael used his sword to block the small scalpel in Giovanni's hand. The vampire threw a sucker punch and caused Mike to stumble back a bit. Mike caught his balance and went on the offensive. He swung his sword towards the vampire. Giovanni did his best to avoid the slashes, but the last one caught his long black coat. The vampire let out a growl and advanced again. He pushed Mike against the wall and tried to bite at his face. Michael had his sword in front of him, pushing the vampire back. Giovanni's hands gripped the blade, causing it to cut through his gloves and cut into his hands. The judge's blade led him to bleed as he gripped down on it tighter. The doctor couldn't take the pain anymore. He tried to swipe at Michael's face, but Michael avoided the fist. Giovanni's arm went through the wall next to Michael's head. Michael used leverage and pushed sideways on his sword. The sword slid through the vampire's remaining hand that held on. The blade cuts deeper as it slides downward. The hilt made contact with Giovanni's face, causing his nose to crack. The vampire stumbled back, all the while eyeing the judge. They licked the blood off his hands and nose, causing Michael to make a face in disgust. The two continued to fight hard with one another, but Mike ultimately got the upper hand. He flipped the doctor over and kicked the scalpel away from his reach. Giovanni landed on the ground with Michael's sword sticking towards his chest. The larger judge came barreling in the room and called out to Michael, "We need him alive." Raiden entered and stopped Michael from killing the vampire. Michael removed the sword and placed it in his sheath on his back. "Baby judge." Giovanni smiled. "Shut up, Count Chocula." Michael reached down and picked the vampire up off the floor with one hand. "You can't just barge into my home. You are violating my rights," Giovanni scoffed. "Yeah, because we are the bad guys. You kill and tear open 21 men. But we are the bad guys." Michael rolled his eyes. "I am a doctor. What about his rights?" Raiden points to the dead human. Giovanni kept quiet as he smiled up at Raiden. "The count would have words with you, doctor." Raiden motioned with his head for Michael to bring him out. The judges would bring him before the secondary count that were set up in America. This was before the black files, when the judges worked alone. The doctor was to live, but he was to be locked up in the Count's jail for some time. The judges to see if they could learn more from this doctor if he were alive. Eva, however, escaped. She drained her bank account and made her way back down south. Back home to her swamp. It had been many years since she left and it was for her to return, but there was nowhere else for her to go. She felt bad for leaving Giovanni, but he would not allow her to stay and go down for his sins. She only hoped the judges would not kill him. Chapter 7, 2020. The Davison line was from the line of Shamber. Little else is known concerning Shamber. His period of leadership bridged the time between Ehud and Deborah. God used one man with one simple weapon to rescue his people from oppression. This example of God working through one person to change the lives of many applies today. The judges are each called to live and fight in God's army, knowing that their actions can have tremendous influence over many people. God chose an unnamed man to accomplish great achievement to bring glory to his name. Much like the judges of today. Most go unnamed or unheard of, but their actions in helping or taking out the enemy is much needed. Shamgar killing 600 of them on his own was an amazing or even miraculous accomplishment. An ox goad was usually a strong stick about 8 feet long used to prod oxen pulling a plow. Using what was perhaps a crude, ancient version of a bow staff, Shamgar destroyed the enemies of Israel. Like Shamgar, Jacob uses the bow staff as a weapon. The young judge was thrusted into the position of the main judge in his reign. Last year his older brother grew sick and passed. This year his father also passed, leaving him the only one left in the Davison family. Jacob's first course of action was to take down Henry Jr. and the docks. The judge helped Colin and Ryden take out the house and toss the fallen angel in the pit last year. This left a huge power gap in the city. The lower devils and creatures fought to try and take the exposition, but the judge had heard rumors of Samuel, another fallen angel from Las Vegas, poking his nose around the city. Jacob would deal with this later, but his first case on the agenda was Henry Jr. This was not only more important, but personal. The docks were run by Meph's great-grandson Henry Jr. Henry Sr., the merman, left this place to his son on his passing. A shipping and pirate empire this great could not be left to a human. Jacob and his family had fought these pirates all their lives from ancient times, living in Japan. After World War II, the Davison Sato family moved to the States. The Satos adopted an American last name of Davison, and was one of the first handfuls of judges in America. The reason this was so personal to Jacob was the fact Henry Jr. was responsible for his mother's death. Jacob sat in the living room of his family's home, oiling his family katana sword. This sword was passed from father to son down the long line of Sato men. It was passed from his father to his brother, but since now both were dead, the sword went to Jacob. Jacob never trained with it, he always used his bow staff to defeat the enemy. Now not only would he need to learn to use this sword, but also learn the ways of a regional judge. He was now responsible for his region. He knew he had to uphold his family honor and God's law, but he felt so alone. His loneliness began to set in, and Jacob started to feel despair and depression. His thoughts often brought him back to the trauma of when he was 8. It was when his life changed forever. The Japanese-American boy was happy and hyper, but soon would change. His parents were loving but strict, instilling values and morals in them, as well as the ways of a judge. While his brother spent more time with their father learning about becoming the judge of their area, when his father passed, Jacob was attached to his mother. The father and eldest son were away tracking Henry Legnon, the merman of the docks. While Judge Davison was away, Henry Jr. had temporary leadership, and took his foolish revenge on the judge's home. The merman had his suspicions that the judge had done something to his father, so he sent a team to take down the home and any residents. Mrs. Davison was the only one home, and she took the full wrath from the pirates. Jacob arrived home from school to the disaster. That scene and trauma left an imprint in the young man all his life. It still to this day affected him. Jacob placed the katana in its sheath and sat silently looking out the window. His cell phone rang and startled the judge. He quickly picked it up and answered it. "Hello, Jacob." It was his teacher Ryden. The sound of this voice cheered Jacob up a bit. "Afternoon, Ryden. I am glad to hear from you." "Yes, it is nice to hear from you as well. How are things on your end? I know you must be dealing with a lot." Ryden was sincere. "You speak the truth. I must confess, I am not doing so well, teacher. I have felt alone, and this has started to affect me a bit. I do not want it to. I know I have a duty to God and the people. It is just this burden, and the feeling of loneliness. I know God is with me, I just feel alone." Ryden listened to Jacob speak his mind and heart to him. He was once in that very situation when his wife passed. Ryden had no children and no one to turn to for comfort. He explained this to Jacob. how he experienced this and the way he was able to push through it. Remember Jacob, we often get trapped in the physical battles, but remember the battles also occur in our mind and the spirit. God is there for all battles and we need to lean on him. You are not alone. We are here for you, so is God. Remember Elijah, the prophet? Jacob asked. Yes. Elijah, when he was sitting under the juniper tree, Elijah had called Israel and its king to repentance, but the king and his wife would not repent. Elijah called down fire from heaven that consumed the altars of the prophets of Baal. Queen Jezebel became incredibly angry and swore to have him slain. Elijah fled alone into the wilderness and sat under a juniper tree. Tired and discouraged, he said, "It is enough. Now, O Lord, take away my life." 1 KGS 19:4. Elijah felt alone and scared, and that he could not go on. What did God tell him? Jacob thought back on the Bible story. He told him that there was still work for him to do. Still people who did not kneel to Baal, and he need to get up, eat and continue on. Correct. So, get up. Eat and continue as a soldier. We need you. Raiden spoke in a soft tone and gave a warm chuckle. I had caught wind of Merlin in your parts. A player like that around, there is reason to be concerned. Go. Find out why he is in your region. It may help you in discovering a way to take down those marine spirits. Those mermaids you and your family have chased for centuries. Yes, sir. Thank you. Jacob smiled as he hung up the phone. He rose from the living room floor and made his way to the kitchen. He prepared a dish that his mother would make him, and he did eat. While eating, he called around for info to find out where Merlin would be staying or visiting. His teacher was right. If a big player like Merlin was in town, it was cause for alarm. Jacob wondered if he was working for Samuel, or maybe another fallen one who wanted to fill the hole Meph left at his departure. Either way, he needed to find out what was going on. He finished his meal and gathered his things. The judge acquired the info he needed, and it was a short drive from his house. The sun was starting to set, so he knew the degenerates and criminals would be emerging. It seemed like the worst crimes happened at night. They loved the darkness and especially the nightlife of downtown New Orleans. Jacob grabbed his helmet and his family katana. He also stuffed the collapsible bow staff Michael had made him in his jacket, before rolling out his black Yamaha street bike. He placed the helmet on his head and started up his bike. Revving the engine, he let the bike idle as he typed in the address of the nightclub. It was a 20-minute drive, but being on a bike, he could get there in 15 minutes. He pocketed his phone and took off out the driveway. The Silver Cauldron was a nightclub run by a voodoo priestess and her Rougarou husband. Rougarou were just Cajun French werewolves. The place housed much of the supernatural community, and the owners did their best to adhere to the judge's laws. But since it was a haven for the supernatural, and the house was gone, the club started to turn for the worst. Jacob pulled up and parked his bike down a side alley. The young judge took his helmet off and hung it off the handlebars. He then brushed his black wispy bangs from his face as he walked down the sidewalk towards the thumping nightclub. The huge bouncer glared at Jacob with glowing eyes. "What do you want, Judge?" he huffed. Jacob did not feel like fighting or arguing with this bouncer, and it showed on his face. "Look, I don't have time for this. Step aside. I am Judge Davison, judge of this region, and I have business here." He spoke boldly and glared up at the bouncer. The bouncer knew the rules. He also knew this judge would most likely beat him, even if he was smaller than him. The bouncer stepped aside and let the judge inside, not wanting trouble. Jacob walked inside the loud nightclub and made his way through the people towards the main bar. He hated these kinds of places. The large crowds and the things that went on, like the drinking, drugs, human and magic, and other perversions, made Jacob's stomach turn. He much rather the quiet hunts, But this was just a part of his duties, to deal with the city and country in his region. The Japanese-American judge walked up to the bar and glanced around for the bartender. A flick of a black horse tail caught his attention, and he stared in amazement at the centaur bartender talking to a customer. He had never seen a creature like this before. They were quite rare. His brown coat matched his brown skin, and Jacob studied his black mohawk trail from his head down half his back. He seemed to be more horse than man. His arms, shoulders and face were human-like, but his torso faded into a horse. He wore a leather vest with charms dangling from it. The charms were most likely enchanted to cover his true form from humans. The centaur turned and walked to the judge. He lifted a brow and placed his hands on the bar. "Can I help you?" the centaur asked. "I am looking for Merlin." Jacob was direct. He learned from writing not to waste time and ask for what you want. The centaur pointed to the VIP section. Jacob glanced and then gave a nod to the centaur. As the judge made his way towards the VIP section, his eyes glanced at the stage. A beautiful Creole female was singing. She was either a siren or banshee. He thought to himself. Both creatures were gifted with magic vocals. Jacob was finally able to catch a glance at this famous Merlin. The Wizard of Legend was not what he expected at all. Merlin looked like he was in his mid-40s, with short blonde hair slicked back. He wore a blue velvet suit and brown shades. He was drinking and cutting up rather loudly. Jacob was expecting some old medieval Gandalf guy, but Merlin was the exact opposite. Jacob walked up the few steps and entered the VIP section. He made his way towards the wizard and stopped a few feet from him. Merlin did not even pay him no mind. He was too busy drinking and cheering on the singer obnoxiously. Jacob was almost unsure this was the right person. "Merlin?" he asked with a raised brow. "I don't go by that name anymore." His thick Scottish accent raised above the noise. He did not even look at Jacob, but he continued to speak. "Just call me Glenn." Merlin smiled and turned to glance at Jacob. "A young judge, huh? I knew your kind would eventually come and question me, but a youngster. Almost a bit disrespectful." Merlin laughed and took a drink. Jacob kept a cold face and tried to not let his words affect him. "I am Judge Davison, judge of this region. I am here to question why you are here in my region." Jacob spoke firmly. Merlin finished his drink and called the waitress over for another. "Another lass. Thank you." He then turned his attention to the judge with a smudge smile. "New Orleans is party central, huh?" The wizard was trying to play off on why he was there, but Jacob saw through that. "Look, I may be young, but I am not stupid. A high roller like the famous Merlin in my town, there must be a reason why. You are famous for your magic and advising kings there," but Merlin cut him off with laughter. "I don't advise kings anymore. That was so dark ages ago." He laughed and his small entourage laughed with him. "Where's my manners? Can I get you a drink?" Merlin or Glenn asked. Jacob just glared. He tried to not let his mocking and laughter get to him, but it slowly was. "No, I want the truth, wizard." Jacob rested his hand on his katana that was strapped to his hip. Merlin glanced down and noticed the sword. His smile faded a bit, but his charm did not. "I mean no disrespect, Judge. I am just trying to have a good time." Merlin rambled on, trying to explain why he was here. Jacob's eyes scanned the doors a few yards behind Merlin. One of them opened, and he noticed a tall, long-haired male walk through. It was Henry Jr. Jacob's eyes widened in anger, and Merlin noticed. He glanced behind him towards Henry and cursed in Gaelic. Henry's eyes locked on Jacob, and the two exchanged a long-distance look of disdain and hatred. Henry quickly turned and ran out the building. Jacob unsheathed his katana, and Merlin's crew jumped to action. Jacob did his best to find off the attack from the 7 males, but it was almost useless. They were all wizards as well, and he was alone in the club. Merlin backed away slowly to run as other patriots ran for the exit, but he was slammed to the ground. A tiny woman fell from the ceiling and landed on top of the wizard. A knife was against his throat as the woman crouched on top of his chest. Merlin huffed and tried to catch his breath, and he raised his hands. "If you wanted an autograph, you could have just asked." He chuckled nervously. The woman removed her mask and placed the dagger under his chin, almost drawing blood. "Kitty!" A roar bellowed for the crowd. Colin made his way through the panicked people as he and another male approached. Colin made his way quickly to Merlin and lifted him up from underneath the murderous-eyed Kitty. Colin was about to fuss with Kitty, but his attention